All right, this is part 2 of the week 3 video. The software that I use only allows me to make a 10-minute video, so if I ever get to the 10-minute point and I have a few more things to say, I have to stop it and make a part 2. So that's the reason for this. Uh, anyway, we were talking about the land ethic and just kind of going through some of the key quotes and ideas. But on page 246, he starts talking about the weakness of conservation when it's based only on economic motives. And basically what he says is that that weakness is that most members of the land community have no economic value. He gives a great example of songbirds disappearing back in his day. And I guess from his telling the story, nobody really seemed to care that much until somebody came along and said, hey, songbirds eat insects, and if we lose the songbirds, insects are going to go crazy and eat us all. So his point is that they had to make it economic in his terms. They had to make it matter to humans. And I think what he is saying is that songbirds should just matter in and of themselves, not because of their benefit to humans. They just have an inherent right to matter. So that's an important point. I do want to point out that this was 1949. I'm an environmental economist, so I can tell you that today in economics, we've made a lot of progress on things like that. We now talk about use and non-use values. And so non-use values include things like ecosystem service values, valuable services done to ecosystems, or existence values. As a human, I might never get to Alaska, but I might just care about the fact that the Arctic National Wildlife Reserve exists. So there are these non-use values. So that's progress in what he's talking about. But you might notice that these are still anthropocentric. They're still economic in that they are human-centered. The values that we talk about in economics are really still only values to humans. So it's still not quite what he's saying. Next point, he talks in there about the land, what he calls the land pyramid or the biotic pyramid. And I just want to mention that he was, again, way ahead of his time in doing this, because I know when I was learning about science in the late 70s, 80s, they talked about the food chain. I was taught about the food chain. It was this very simplistic thing like a ladder where the big animals eat the medium-sized animals and the medium-sized animals eat the small animals. Now they're realizing that it's far more complex than that. So now I think the preferred term is the food web, because it's this, complex, interconnected web of things that eat other things and live on other things, and it's much more complicated than we used to think. So really, if you read that section on the land pyramid, that's kind of what he's describing. So again, way ahead of his time. I think that's kind of cool. Whoops. There we go. All right, so this term A-B cleavage comes in there. And basically, that's Leopold's term for that original dichotomy that I talked about earlier. He says that there are two groups out there. Group A, who regards the land as soil, merely soil, and its function is commodity production, meaning it's there to grow food for us, trees for us, produce minerals for us. It's all about producing stuff for people. So this is related to that view of man the conqueror, man the steward of the land. Group B regards the land as biota, as a living organism, a living flow of energy and resources, and its function is something way broader than just to serve man. So, this goes back to that idea of people as being just bionic citizens, not bionic, biotic, and one species among many. So he gives some examples in there from forestry and other fields, but that term A-B cleavage is, again, just that same basic two viewpoints, and I ask you about that in both the reflection piece and the exercise for this week. So hopefully this helps. Just a great quote here. He says on page 262 in my book that we need to quit thinking about decent land use as solely an economic problem. Examine each question in terms of what is ethically and aesthetically right, as well as what is economically expedient. So examine each question in terms of what is ethically and aesthetically right. And then he actually goes on to tell you what that is. And I love this line. This is a pretty famous, often quoted line from the land ethic. He says, a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. Wow, I mean, that's like black and white, you know. It's great. I love it. It's not that simple to put that into practice or apply it to every situation, but I love that simple definition. Again, I want to point out that a lot of progress has been made in the field of economics. There's a whole subdiscipline now called ecological economics. My dissertation was kind of along these lines, but it's very interdisciplinary. My work, for example, I looked at economic models of land use change, which, you know, the economics can predict how land use patterns will change and how people will respond to different policies. But then we were able to integrate that with wildlife habitat models that told us kind of how the wildlife would respond. So you know, it becomes this not a linear thing, but kind of a feedback mechanism. If we put this policy in play, here's what happens to the land, here's what happens to the animals, and you can kind of play that out over time. So, you know, there's been a lot of progress made in this area, at least in academic circles. So I think that's worth mentioning. All right, I think we're almost done here. The last section, Leopold talks a bit about wilderness. He talks about these 3 reasons for wilderness. I'll let you read that for yourself. But I think it's pretty good stuff. And I like that last quote, and I think it might be important to think about, especially as you do your reflection piece. Wilderness is a resource which can shrink but not grow. That's interesting. That, I don't know, that might be relevant. I think that's kind of cool. I'm not sure if I agree with it, but it's an idea. All right, that's pretty much it. If you're watching these, you know that I like to throw in a bonus point here and there. So if you are watching, either email or text me the simple 2 words, autumn leaves. Hope you like the background. That's a photo I took out hiking with my kids last week. So email or text me autumn leaves. That's all you need to do. Just include your name if it's a text, and I'll add a bonus point. Okay, thanks for watching.